wanted to rethink the Batmobile. It's a key component of Batman's arsenal.
The Batmobile was so unbelievably well engineered.
They've really come up with something absolutely unique. There hasn't ever been a car like this before.
I was shocked. It was completely different to what I thought it would look like.
You're watching it and thinking, yeah, I could believe that he could get a car like that.
This car is so cool. I finally understood men's fascination with cars after I saw this thing.
It's the Batmobile. It should be a car that every kid wants.
What's that?
Well, the tumbler? Oh, you wouldn't be interested in that.
I felt that it was very important to design the Batmobile first before we approached any of the other aspects of design of the film, because I had a very specific idea in my head about a contemporary approach to a Batmobile. And our approach to it would tell everybody who saw it a lot about what we're doing with the whole film, which is a more grounded reality in which we're trying to base this story.
When we first started talking, Chris had this idea of crossing a Lamborghini and a Humvee. Chris was sort of making a little primitive model out of Play-Doh and said, sort of like this.
It was very, very crude. It looked more like a croissant than a car. But I felt very strongly that if we cracked that and showed it to people, they would either get it or they wouldn't. And if they didn't get it, then I'd know I was in trouble.
Then fairly early on in the process, Nathan Crowley, the production designer, came on. And while I was writing, this was crazy, he created a little model shop in Chris's garage. It was very much a film school atmosphere. That was part of the fun.
We really decided to be private and just started what I call model bashing. We just started making models of cars.
It's got bits of stealth bomber in it. It's got bits of Lamborghinis, bits of Hummers, and all different things put together in this marvelous combination.
Chris write his script and then come into the garage and I'd be covered in glue with car concepts.
The funny thing is the craftsmanship was really good, too. You could see in Chris a kid that had built little car models when he was younger, because, you know, he and Nathan really had this down.
As an evolutionary process, Nathan was able to build one, and I would look at it and make suggestions or actually change things like myself, and then we would move to the next step and then the next one.
We made about 5 or 6 Batmobiles. The one is the finished Batmobile, I think is the Mark V, so we took about 8 weeks to build.
When the script was done, we sort of presented not only the script, but all these great Photoshop elements of what the world and the Batmobile would look like so that Warner Brothers could get the whole picture. And that initial prototype is 90% what the finished Batmobile became.
We took that model to England, found these great guys to produce the car full size.
Chris Nolan wanted the Batmobile to be a real car, not just a car that looked pretty but didn't actually function, you know. His gem was, look, I want this to be a mean machine. I want it to perform. I want it to go through things, and that was, you know, how we went into developing this whole car.
The challenge is first technically how to make something as complicated as that steer and work. Every piece of it has been made. You start with a clean jig, put the chassis on, start building the roll cage around the driver and the occupants in there, and build it up from nothing. The front end of the car is what is so different. There is no front axle. There's nothing holding the wheels in the conventional way. The wheels have to be held from the outside. It was difficult, but we always knew it was possible.
And 3, 2, 1, go. Chris had described the cockpit opening like the petals of a flower. We tried several times to talk him into an easier system, which made our life a bit easier, but he was not going to have that. The mechanism ended up where the front windscreen went up into the roof, and then the whole roof slides back, and then the 2 cockpit seats rise up. It was a nightmare trying to get that right. You've just got to have guys who've got technical knowledge of how to put all this together.
They were so faithful to our original kit bash model that the glue blobs that Nathan had put into the model had been reproduced full size. It was quite a strange thing to look at.
It's 9'4" at its widest. Lengthwise, it's 15 feet, and height-wise, it's about 5 foot, I think. weighs 2.5 tons. There's nearly half a ton of rear axle and wheels and tyres. So there's a big chunk of the weight sitting there.
Everybody was surprised to find that the Batmobile was ready before we thought it was going to be.
That's been very thrilling to watch. A model that Nathan Crowley just built in my garage back in LA become a full-size working vehicle.
Here we have Andy and Jim going for the land speed record.
It was about 2 weeks before we started filming that we got the first prototype, without all the bodywork on, just a working chassis with the engine in. So we were sneaking the car around, taking it out to sort of hidden tracks and things, seeing what brakes, what doesn't brake. Start off testing it slowly, just drive in a straight line, make sure it handles okay. And progressively getting faster and faster. And slowly, through a development process, you arrive at a vehicle that can achieve all the shots on the page.
You can get to play Batman, but unless you're the stuntman who's driving that car, you don't get to have the coolest job.
The stunt side of it is we bring in one of the best drivers, George Cottle, who's young, but he's enthusiastic and extremely talented.
The car has so much potential. In one respect, I have the easy job because I know that if they say the car can do it, I know it'll do it.
We will rehearse every single shot with measurements of the location on a runway prior to going to the location so that you're aware of any problems before you get to the location when you've got the expense of the film crew there.
It's such a great car to drive, you know, it just screams at you, literally, you know, the noise is like somebody screaming at you. And I called Chris and I said, does this mean I'm gonna be able to keep a Batmobile? He said, you're crazy, of course you're not gonna be able to keep a Batmobile.
This here simulates the jump onto the freeway. The tape on the right-hand side of frame is the barrier, and the ramp is just behind it.
We'd practiced jumping the car so much, we just testing how the car reacted in the air, making sure it was balanced, whether we needed to put kick ramps on the car.
We went out to try and kill the car. You know, that's what we were trying to do, push it to the limits.
I was waiting for something not to work. It just landed and just took off straight away.
Roll camera, please. 305 Echo, take one. 3, 2, 1, action.
I've got to get me one of those.
The car chase in Chicago, Chris from the beginning wanted to do something really extraordinary and fast.
We wanted to be able to use the Batmobile as a real car and have a real car chase that looks back to, you know, the French Connection and films like this, not the usual kind of studio-bound use of the Batmobile.
It's very rare that you drive a vehicle in a stunt sequence more than 50 or 60 miles per hour. And we took this Batmobile and drove speeds up to 80, 90 miles an hour, I think. And then on the open road, we got up to 100 miles an hour.
There's no trick photography. It's real time, real speed. You know, when the car's going 100, we're going 100.
Our basic approach to tracking with the Batmobile is a device called the Ultimate Arm, which is basically a Mercedes ML55 with a robotically controlled crane arm that gives you shots that you can't get any other way on moving vehicles.
The first night of tracking, they were shouting out speeds of 86, 88 miles an hour. I've never done speeds like that, only on helicopter tracking shots. But to do it from car to car tracking that's fast.
The director's in this Mercedes with the crane arm on it, flying along at 100 miles an hour. The Batmobile's flying along at 100 miles an hour. And so really there's no room for error. I mean, one little thing goes wrong and somebody's life is in danger.
On this film, George has probably done some of the best driving I've ever seen in all the years I've been doing it. He was absolutely tremendous.
There was a particular shot in Chicago to come down an exit ramp into like, this big bus depot, and they wanted the car to come in and slide sideways, almost do like a complete 360, and then back out again in between two cars. And at first I was always kind of like, I don't know if it'll do it, and the first time we did it did it so easily. There was not one stunt where the car didn't drive away from it. It always managed to drive away from it. We had to break this huge breakaway wall. No matter how breakaway it is, it's never going to be that breakaway. And I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to put the car through it. We did it. She got a few scratches, broke the glass, but apparently she's up and running again now. So I'll ask her if I can keep it, take it home at the end of the film.
This evening we're doing the final part of the car chase sequence. Batman loses the helicopter and the police cars that are chasing him, and then hits the jump, takes off, flies across a river and into his Batcave. We're going to do the takeoff, and we'll land the car into a box rig just to protect the car, and then the entry into the Batcave we'll shoot later at Shepperton on a stage where we'll actually jump the car through a waterfall and land it on the stage.
Action! Okay, we good? Yeah, George's okay? We're good.
The landing in the Batcave we're doing for real with our real 2-ton car.
Initially, we were going to build a long run-up outside and actually drive it in, but we had big limitations within the studio, how we could get through the door. It was very narrow. We only had like 3 or 4 inches each side of the car. We actually decided in the end to stick a nitrogen cannon in it and fire it off of a ramp just the other side of the waterfall. The flip side is we had to stop it very quickly because it would have gone straight out the other side of the set. So we had a restraining cable on it so we could stop it within 8-10 feet.
I'd like everyone to clear the set, please, and go to their positions they're going to be for the shoot. Okay, everyone stand by, please. And roll over, please. And 3, 2, 1, action!
Everything we did out there was done for real. None of the car turnovers or cannons or pipe ramps, none of it was CGI. And we really did do it. And that's what makes it so real, and, taking it back to the days of, even back to, Bullet or The French Connection or Ronin, everything was done for real.
I think this is the best Batmobile, for sure.
It just worked great, like clockwork. There's nothing I would change if we went back there and shot it again.
We're pleased with the overall performance of the whole thing. The speed, the handling, everything. It's turned out better than expected.
For Bruce Wayne's story to be sufficiently believable, sufficiently epic, I felt it was very necessary in the early stages of the film to have Bruce Wayne disappear, as indeed in the history of the comic books, it's clear that he disappears for about 7 years or so.
Ra's al Ghul.
That, to me, is a fascinating concept, the idea of this heroic figure who, as a very flawed character, a very human character, leaves the place that he's ultimately to return to and travels and learns and then returns as a changed person.
If I hadn't been scared, they would still be alive.
And do you still feel responsible?
My anger outweighs my guilt.
Come.
Are they there?
Back to one, we'll get safety on that.
We knew one of the biggest set pieces of the whole movie had to involve Bruce prior to becoming Batman, and it had to be an absolutely massive and thrilling sequence. And we figured if we could sort of get the audience invested in Bruce in that way, then it wouldn't matter whether or not he had the cape and cowl on.
You'll turn back. So things, you'll go back.
I want you to look through the camera, because what we'll do is we'll cheat it, we'll cut. Because I'll have the other side. Very good. I'll walk down that steep slope, apparently.
We were determined not to have this film feel like it had been filmed on a lot, you know, on a back lot, on the studio lot. We wanted there to be locations that would expand it, that would make the playing field and the canvas feel larger.
He meets his rival, we obviously don't understand that till the end of the film, in a Bhutanese monastery. So we wanted to place this monastery and the village he goes through on the way to the monastery in a really dramatic landscape. Obviously, Bhutan's in the Himalayas, and we couldn't go there. So we were looking for a landscape you can film in above the tree line that isn't covered in snow or it can't access, which is always the big problem. And preferably, we have a frozen lake and a glacier. You know, you're looking for glaciers that sit below 3,000 feet, which is, there ain't many. I think there's only one in British Columbia, so we didn't want to go that far. So Iceland, we went to Iceland, and there you go, sea level, glacier, mountains, no trees, rocky landscape, felt like the Himalayas. So we built a village on the edge of a glacier, and we built the front doors of the monastery on just around the corner. We were there from January till March building it. You know, it's obviously in its winter, so there's not very little light. Lots of storms, lots of rain. The monastery is being built as a miniature, and we're going to put that in behind the front doors, so it's a combination of elements.
The power of movies, you know, we can kind of go anywhere and sort of tame it for our use. It was strange to be in a section of the world where there wasn't a tree, and there wasn't the sound of a bird. It was kind of like a gorgeous Beckett wasteland, you know. It was beautifully dangerous. You're stronger than your father.
You didn't know my father.
I know the rage that drives you. That impossible anger strangling your grief until the memory of your loved one is just poison in your veins.
My thinking about starting in Iceland was I needed a frozen lake, and it was going to be gone by the end of February, so we had to start.
It wasn't really so much Chris changing the schedule as Mother Nature, really, just because he had found this beautiful lake right beneath this stunning glacier. We were meant to have a couple of days to be able to rehearse and go through the sword fight. And, you know, they called us and said, right, that's it, you know, no rehearsals, let's just go straight to it. We got to film it because we don't know how long this is going to last, because it could thaw out any day.
You know how to fight 6 men. We can teach you how to engage 600.
And lucky that we did it, because while we were filming that scene, we would hear these loud cracks in the ice, and everybody would have to stand dead still, you know. And they would call a few people off the ice and say, okay, you know, now it's only good to have 5 people out on the ice and no more than that. And gradually the whole thing was falling apart as we filmed.
Always mind your surroundings. Every so often, between setups, we'd see ice crumbling away at the head of this glacier and bits of rock and muck falling off, that you knew this thing was a big living force that was moving towards you. Anger does not change the fact that your father failed to act.
From my standpoint, really didn't involve that much. I mean, it was a handheld camera, a steady cam. We did one shot where I'm sitting on a sled, and they scooted me across the ice to get a shot, which is in the movie. And so it was a really pretty low-tech way of filming.
We were able to get, I think, 33 setups in one day or something and just hammer through it, very much in the style of a smaller film. In a sense, that was a part of the film the most similar to films I'd made in the past.
Yield. You haven't beaten me. You have sacrificed sure footing for a killing stroke.
By the next day, it was pretty much just a lake again. And I like that, actually. You know, it's nice sometimes to kind of surprise yourself with the beginning and not feel completely ready. You know, sometimes there's a benefit, I find myself, to just getting started and jumping in.
We wanted to go back out again, but we couldn't. And so we faked it a little bit after that. But all the really wide, beautiful stuff, we got that on the day that we were supposed to prep. I think every movie at some point has a location or a set that is going to be a nightmare no matter what happens. And you have to sort of suffer through that nightmare because it's something that the movie demands and has to be done. On this one, it was Iceland.
Let's go for our final checks, please, and let's stand by the shoot.
One of the first moments that Chris and I talked about in the film was when Bruce Wayne is climbing his way up to Ra's al Ghul's temple, and he's covered in ice and bleeding and has to drag his battered body into this smoky, grand temple at the top of the world.
Okay, folks, everyone here has to come down the hill now, please, without fail. Everyone, please.
Our first day shooting that, we got 60-mile-an-hour winds and pouring rain and just really, really rough weather conditions. And instead of doing this crane shot that Chris and I had talked about doing at the bottom of the village, we ended up throwing the camera on my shoulder, kind of, you know, hunkering down and walking up the hill in the blowing rain and getting as much as we could before we had to pull the plug and get out of there.
3, take 1. Okay, take the train, please.
Iceland should have a lot more snow, but it's like anything. We have to cater for any how the weather changes.
Start the snow.
We've got various types of snow. We're actually bringing snow and ice to Iceland. Rain effects, well, we're leaving that to God at the moment.
Bruce's climb up the mountain. When he goes up, you know, walks through the village, the guy tells him to turn back. That was a huge challenge, and it was more a challenge of stamina than anything else. It was freezing cold, the wind was roaring, and it was just miserable, quite frankly. And I think that the fact that we all got through that meant that we knew we were in a good place to continue.
Filming in Iceland, the first week of production was like being thrown into combat. I had a completely new crew, an all-English crew that I'd never worked with before, who did a fabulous job, but we were all kind of thrown into the mud, wind, ice, rain, hail, whatever was hitting us there, and had to work out all the bugs of not only our communication, but filming the movie and doing some crucial scenes.
The other issue we had out there, of course, was we had to do Ducard and Wayne sliding down the ice and off the cliff edge, again, which we wanted to do for real. So we built an ice slide the week previously to the crew going out there.
We took 2 containers of snow out there as a backup and ended up using the whole lot. We covered half the mountain in artificial snow, and we were exhausted by the end of that week.
In terms of the stunt, we'd rehearsed, it was all pre-rigged, ready to go so that we don't keep the crew waiting. And then on the day you're standing there thinking, I hope this works.
The guys who were part of the stunt team went out to Iceland while we were filming another sequence. They would rig it all, get the timing, the wire lengths and everything. And then me and Mark would step in on the day, do a couple of rehearsals, and then the tape rolled.
Okay, here we go, guys. Stand by, please. Buster. Just remember that the hand you're digging in with, that is supposedly taking the weight of both you and the guy you're holding, so a real stop on that, really hanging from that gauntlet. Roll cameras, please. Okay, here we go, guys. Good luck, everyone. 3, 2, 1, action! Cut there. Okay, if you want to change your lens, Wally, Chris is saying, we'll keep the same lens on here. We're going to do the drop down again.
When we just had to rely on the wire stopping us again. It's back to the trust again. You've got to rely on the gents who are setting up the wires and
yeah, it's all the background guys as well.
It's all the guys behind the scenes that you've really got to put your trust in.
Let's roll cameras, please.
It looks dangerous. It is dangerous because anything could go wrong, but it is safe. The cable that's holding those guys could hold 25 times more weight than those guys are on. The thing that's in the ground is 75 times more deep than it has to be. The compounding of all the specs to a degree where virtually impossible, although an accident could happen anytime. So yes, it's very scary.
Cut. You guys okay? Mark okay? Thumbs up. Excellent.
We needed one single shot, which is sliding with them down the ridge over the edge to be able to tip down and to see the ravine. In pre-production, Chris and I talked about it, and we both really wanted to get a realistic over-the-edge shot and not do it CGI, not do it blue screen back on the stage so you could really get the feel that you're there. And I think we were able to accomplish it, but that meant bringing this techno crane to the top of the mountain, and it was really the best way to get it. So it was the best tool for the job. It wasn't just a toy, you know, that we made the guys bring up there. And then Chris also really wanted to get in there with them with a handheld camera and be right in with them as they slid down the hill. And so we took our usual low-tech approach to it to test it and to see really if it was going to be fast enough.
Too slow.
And also to get an idea of how much we were going to be able to shoot on location and how much we would leave behind to shoot on a set piece that we were going to build months and months later.
What you're looking at is he's just sort of sliding towards a cliff edge. Yeah. So you're going down and you grab him with your right hand. Let's go with your turn your body around like that. So on this one, we'll just get the lead into that. The horizontal backline.
There's a great spirit that comes out of that in accomplishing what we were able to accomplish there. And I think that the attitude that Chris and I took towards it was, let's just go in there and get what we can and just get all that we can and come out of there alive with great footage.
Cheat it even further back and cheat it this way.
I wasn't worried about starting with this outdoor, this sort of extreme location.
Action!
The crew and the cast and so forth came through with flying colours. That gave me a very high degree of confidence about how they were going to approach the rest of this rather large film.
That's the thing, to stand up on that glacier and say, you know what, we decided to do this, we did it, and it's fantastic. Those kind of moments on movies are hard to forget, and standing in the middle of it and going, yeah, baby, that's what it's all about.
Whilst I wanted the terms of the storytelling to be as realistic as possible, the expectation of this kind of epic film is that the action go as big as possible at the end. That you take things to as extreme and as large and as extraordinary a set of circumstances as can be achieved without violating the terms of the storytelling. So all of the action at the end is designed to push the envelope as far as possible, but never abandon the grounded roots that we've tried to establish in the tone of the storytelling.
Don't you have anything new? How about this?
The idea is we'll try and shoot it first of all, we'll try and do it practically, we'll do a stunt, we'll do special effects, and only then when we exhausted those ideas will we try and turn to visual effects. So wherever we could do a stunt, even if it meant painting out a huge amount of wires or a rig or something like that, we'd opt to do that. It's a frame-by-frame laborious process. The benefit you get is you really get somebody doing the stunt. It's there, it's on film, everybody can see it, whereas creating the same thing digitally from scratch, you know, that takes a hell of a long time just to get it to that believability level.
That was something that I really wanted to crack, getting the look of all this huge amounts of steam going off, and we spent a lot of time and research. And the whole of Cardington had a network of piping with massive great steam generators, and there were, I think, 20 manhole covers, which every single one was piped in with a 2-inch outlet of steam, and when we hit every one of those, the steam went up 150 foot. It reached the roof. So we would do a run, let it all off, and then Chris would shout cut. We would switch it all off, and then it would like rain for about 20 seconds where all the condensed steam had gone up, hit the roof, and now was coming back down. Quite bizarre.
Hey! What the hell are you doing?
Gentlemen, time to spread the word. And the word is panic.
I couldn't really see anything, but I thought it was so cool. I enjoyed it. I mean, I've had so much fun every day. We have the best of the best people working on this movie, so it's like, wow, okay, what do I do now? You know?
You know, as we've always said, that everything we can do on the movie for real, we will do. In this particular sequence, we've done a shot of him firing the gun and flying up to the train, and a continuation of that where he's flying along under the train. So Steve Crawley, who's our wire effects supervisor, rigged up a system for us with computers, and I think it looks fabulous. You know, he's flying along, we've got him smashing through gantries as he goes along.
By the time I get to that bridge, I think I'm hitting about 30 mile an hour. We only did about a 15, 20 mile an hour rehearsal. Did it about 75%, but today we must have gone full speed. Someone must have had the Weetabix this morning.
The relationship between stunts and special effects is very close indeed, you know, because ultimately, you know, Paul and I talk about what we're going to do in the scene, and then we go away, we design the rig, build the rig, but then we have to work with Paul's team to put them in amongst it and make sure they're happy with it.
When he's flying along, his boys are watching all the time to see where the performer is, and they'll time it so that he's in no danger. But we can still have him coming through the steam. It's just making sure that he's missed by the manhole covers and things like that. That's working with a good special effects team who you can trust and aren't going to hurt your guys, you know.
It's a big thing to get set up and to get going, but once you do it, you look at dailies the next day and you've completed it. You've shot this amazing shot of Batman flying 800 feet across a city, and you've done it in an interior space during the day without the use of visual effects. That, I think, capsulizes Chris's philosophy of filmmaking, which is let's do it for real. Let's put it down the way you would see it, you would believe it, and that'll give us the kind of credibility to bring the audience in.
I wanted their confrontation at the end to be true to the spirit of the rest of the film, so that the actual confrontation be on the most human and almost banal scale possible.
Action!
The decision was made early on to do outside the windows 100% CGI. So we made the decision to build the train on stage and surround it with a green screen. Yannick Serge, the visual effects supervisor, and Dan Glass, the other visual effects supervisor, really came up with all the mathematics to figure out how high off the ground the train had to be lifted in order to not see off the green screen when handheld inside the train.
Action!
My approach to the train was I wanted to have kind of standard interior fluorescent lighting, but wanted to be able to flicker those lights a little bit as a real subway train would in a city. In addition to that, I used a series of 30 or 40 tracking lights with different colored gels on them outside the train on a dimmer board and what they call a chase, so the lights would go off one at a time. So the effect is a flickering light on the face that looks like you're going past lights in the city streets. So when all those elements come together, you really end up creating an environment that I think is very realistic. It's taking all the technology just to go back to square one and create something naturalistic and real looking.
At the end of the movie, it's a combination of digital train, digital city, and then as soon as things start to blow up and you really need all that kind of interaction and crashing, there's a switch over there gradually to using a miniature train, colliding with a miniature environment. It still seems more feasible these days to actually do things with real things blowing up, even at small scale, than it does to do it digitally at this point.
We've got a collapsing monorail leg, which is at the far end of the set, which special effects have matched what we've built here. and that's basically hinged, so as part of the end, the finale, it will tip over.
3, 2, 1, action!
How did it go for you? Very well, thank you. Very well indeed. Well done. You get it? Yeah.
It was quite funny because when we came to do the shot, I had a bet with Chris Nolan where it would land, and we positioned the car, and I think we had a bottle of champagne on it, something like that, where he thought it would land one place and I knew it would land another place, but ended up where I thought it would land and also ended up where Chris thought it would land, so there was no settlement of the bet in the end. The miniature department made up the monorail sections. It was a matter of hanging them up and triggering them to release, you know, when the leg fell away. You know, they had all the ingredients there.
We have a 6-scale miniature of the thing, and with the special effects guys and model guys, we will sort of realise the destruction of this thing as it plummets to the ground. The reason the miniatures are so big is we basically wanted to achieve as much reality as we could. We're featuring all the usual stuff of fire and dust and sort of destruction effects. So in order to make them look as realistic as possible, we've gone for the biggest manageable scale that we could construct, which has turned out to be 6-scale. The train itself is catapulted down the rail, the broken rail, using a pulley system and gravity effects. Also, the cameras are shooting at 4 times normal speed, so the train is actually slowed down on screen in order to give it sort of scale and mass and what have you. And I'm hoping to acquire a really sort of spectacular sequence out of it for the film.
3, 2, 1, action!
Unfortunately, because of the scale of a lot of the models we've got here, it's not just simply a case of just going in and grabbing them and pushing them around till you get the correct positioning, what have you. They're so damn big that we have to use forklifts and what have you to move them around. They're very cumbersome, so therefore it's very time-consuming to set up a lot of these effects. But ultimately, I think the end result's worth it. So I believe that was probably one of the biggest miniature shoots ever. The great thing about this is we're actually getting the best of both worlds here, in that we've got miniature effects augmented with CG effects, and ultimately the product should have a much more unique look, better than it would have if it had gone completely CG. So it's got a much more organic feel about it.
This can now be done on computer graphics, but it just involves a huge amount of chaos. Explosions, dust, debris, crushed cars, crashing trains. It's just very, very complex. In this particular case, a mixture of models and CG is the best way to go for everyone.
Wow! Well, it actually lights up the interior of the train as well. Very nice. Clean sweep. What do you want to do next? Another one.
Yeah. Again. Come on. We kind of take our cue from the action on stage and then work out to build on top of that. So they'll film their live action pieces, be limited to a certain kind of scale, and then we'll cut to maybe a digital shot or a miniature shot and go bigger than that, but take our cue from those. This shot was challenging for a number of reasons. First off was that the Batman animation had to dovetail with a practical stunt in the preceding shot, where we actually see Batman exiting the train from inside the train. So here we have Wayne Station, pyrotechnic elements added to it. We have now added the crash set at the bottom, adding the foreground buildings, the foreground architecture. So now adding the train and the monorail towers, debris passes coming out the back of the train, all the dust and stuff. And now we've added pretty much everything. We've got Batman in there. We make sure we can see Batman by putting lots of light on the buildings behind him.
But at the same time, we can't just light everything. So we've had to dramatically add uplighters, little light sources, turn on some of the windows, add window reflections, so that we basically create Batman as a silhouette.
Constantly keep showing Chris where we're going with the shot, keeps looking at stuff, getting his feedback, getting his interaction there. And slowly the shot progresses and builds to the level where, like, oh, reaching critical mass, it's looking like it might be done. And then, of course, it's not, and we go and do it many more times until Chris is happy.
Whereas I sit here, having just finished the film, I'm extremely happy with what I've been able to do in my terms. That is to say, I've made the film that I said I was going to make. I've made it in the way that I wanted to make it. I've availed myself of all kinds of extraordinarily dedicated and creative collaborators, and ultimately they've helped me to make the film the way I felt it should be made. And there isn't a frame of the film that I don't claim as my own, and that's very satisfying from a creative point of view.
Very nice. Check the gates on that. Swap bus transfer. Okay. Thank you very much. Let's go downstairs.